A faint cry echoed through the dark, cold hallways of an Atlanta apartment complex. A young woman knocked on each door, her hands bloody, her breathing labored as she raced for her life. But all the doors were closed. No one opened them, no one spoke. And then, she collapsed, just steps from her own apartment door. When the police arrived, they found the lifeless body of Ashley Burton, a talented hairstylist, a transgender woman, and a beacon of light in the community. But what happened in that small apartment that turned an ordinary evening into tragedy? Ashley Burton's story begins on a gloomy morning on the 11th of April, 2023, at the Elite at City Park Apartments. Before the sun had even risen, the residents of the building were startled by a frantic knock on the door. A weak, trembling voice rang out. "Please, help me." Those were Ashley's last moments, before she collapsed in the middle of the hallway, just a few short steps from safety. For many, Ashley's death was an unimaginable shock. But to fully understand this tragedy, we must rewind time, back to the days when she was alive, still laughing and still dreaming. Ashley was born in the American South, into a family that was not wealthy but warm. Her childhood was associated with afternoons sitting on the porch, listening to the sound of rain falling, the smell of wet grass mixed with the laughter of her siblings. From a young age, Ashley discovered two things that made her different: her skillful hands that could turn hair into art, and her desire to be her true self, without hiding or fear. As an adult, Atlanta became a promised land. It was a city where the lights of hair salons stayed on until late at night, where different people could confidently wear their own identities. In her small office, Ashley did more than cut hair, curl, or apply makeup. She gave her customers confidence, so that each person could look in the mirror and see a better version of themselves. What version of yourself do you want to be today? Ashley's familiar question made many people come back, not only because of her technique, but also because of her gentleness and warmth. Family and friends loved Ashley because she never lived half-heartedly. Her brother Patrick was always there to take care of her, and Ivory, her cousin, who is also a transgender woman, became her spiritual support. To them, Ashley is a light that never goes out. In the eyes of her clients, she is a symbol of confidence and sincerity. But beneath that perfect shell, Ashley's life is not peaceful. The line between clients, friends, and ambiguous relationships is often very fragile. Some people text her after hours, others act gallant, but in return they control her, demanding to know her location every hour. Ashley politely refuses, but that politeness is sometimes mistaken for agreement. Among the faces around her, one name stands out: Darius Mills, a man who used to appear in Ashley's apartment late at night, not a stranger but never clear. People don't know if they have a romantic relationship or just a vague acquaintance, but one thing is certain: Mills's presence is always associated with tension that Ashley tries to hide. The night of the 11th of April started peacefully. Soft music played in the apartment. The two talked as usual. But then, when the phone screen lit up, Mills began to demand, "Show me, just to put my mind at ease." Ashley shook his head, gently but firmly. "The phone is my business." Just that one sentence turned the atmosphere into a stifling one. Mills grabbed the phone, and when the text messages and photos inside revealed Ashley's true life, a transgender woman living openly, his face darkened. Prejudice, anger, All of it exploded in an instant. Ashley tried to grab it back. "Give it back to me." But the phone had now become evidence of an existence that Mills did not accept. In a decisive second, he pulled out his gun. The shot rang out, dry, decisive, like a long-prepared sentence. Ashley staggered, blood seeping through his shirt. But her survival instincts remained. She rushed out the door, ran down the hallway, knocked on each apartment door in the faint hope that someone would open it. However, they were all closed, and just a few minutes later, she collapsed, leaving the whole city of Atlanta with a question. Why didn't those doors open? There are many other details behind this incident that will leave you speechless. If you find it worth listening to, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. In Ashley's small apartment, the atmosphere was initially normal. She had just finished a long day of work. The room still smelled of hairspray. R&B music was playing softly from the Bluetooth speaker on the table. On the sofa, Darius Mills sat calmly, his eyes following Ashley's every move as if searching for something. They talked about trivial things, asked about her health, about tomorrow's plans. It wasn't a noisy conversation. On the contrary, it was too peaceful. The kind of fragile peace like the surface of a lake before a rock was thrown. Then Ashley's phone screen lit up. A small, normal notification. But in Mills's eyes, it was like a spark catching fire in a tank of gasoline. He leaned over, pointed. "Let me see. I just want to know, to be sure." Ashley paused. Her voice still had the familiar gentleness, but this time, it was a bit firm. "The phone is my personal business." It was a seemingly harmless remark, but to Mills, it felt like a slap. He smiled awkwardly, stepped closer, and then, in a moment of impulse, snatched the phone from her hand. The light from the screen fell on his face. His fingers slid through the series of messages, photos, work plans. And then, he stopped. The daily confidences, the photos Ashley proudly shared about herself, about her journey to live as her true gender, about her life as a transgender woman, were like a mirror reflecting the truth that Mills could not accept. His eyes turned cold. From a friend, an ambiguous companion, Mills had now turned into a self-appointed judge. In his mind, the prejudices, the rumors, the distorted stories about transgender people that society had stuffed into him for so long, suddenly flooded back. In front of him now was no longer Ashley, a friend, a talented stylist, but only a distorted image created by prejudice. Ashley reached out, her voice tense but calm. "Give it back to me." The phone suddenly became a battlefield. On one side was privacy and dignity. On the other was possession and anger. Mills took a half-step back, holding the phone as if it were evidence of an accusation. "Who let you live like this? Why?" He growled, but did not really wait for an answer. In the small space, the atmosphere was thick. Ashley stepped back, her eyes still fixed on the gun that had just flashed from the waist of Mills's pants. She realized he was pulling it out, his hand shaking but his eyes fierce. "Don't do it," Ashley pleaded. "It's my life, it's me. Don't take it away." But to someone who was already immersed in prejudice, every word at this moment was like pouring gasoline on the fire. The gunshot rang out. Clean, dry, and sharp. The bullet pierced the air, leaving an echo that made the whole room stop breathing. Ashley recoiled, her hand reflexively covering her face, blood starting to stain her shirt. She didn't scream. There was only a sharp intake of breath, as if trying to swallow the pain. In that moment, Ashley knew she had to leave the apartment immediately. If she stayed, there would be no more chances. The door swung open. She rushed into the hallway, her legs shaking but still trying to run. Her hands pounded on each door, the sound of her fists echoing. "Please help me." Someone opened the door. The hallway was long and narrow. The sensor lights turned on with each step she took. Behind her, Mills walked slowly out, his shadow imprinted on the white wall, watching like a ghost. In each apartment, someone jumped up, walked towards the eye. They saw the image of a woman covered in blood, saw the man standing silently in the distance, but instead of opening the door, they closed the peephole screen, their hearts pounding, their hearts filled with fear. Opening the door might invite danger into the house. Ashley continued to knock. Once, twice, 3 times. The cries for help gradually faded. Her voice was hoarse, turning into a moan. Her breathing was heavy, as if each step was a life or death struggle. Behind her, Mills continued to walk slowly, not running, not rushing, like a hunter who knew his prey was exhausted. An apartment flashed. Someone asked, "Who is it?" Ashley struggled. "Please, I need help." But then the door fell silent again. No sound of a lock turning, no hands pulling her inside. Ashley fell to her knees, her hands supporting herself against the wall, her eyes dimly seeing the flashing exit sign in the distance. Just a few more steps, but her legs no longer obeyed. She fell, her body limp, blood streaking red on the cold tile floor. Just a few steps from her own apartment door, she gave up. The hallway was quiet again. The wind whistled through the cracks of the door. The lights flickered, as if nothing had happened. Only the body of a woman lay motionless, and the shadow of a man half hidden in the security camera's view. When the police arrived, everything was too late. Ashley had stopped breathing. They recorded the scene. Bloodstains all over the hallway, handprints on the door, and especially the missing phone. What makes a person pull the trigger just because they see the truth about another person? And more heartbreakingly, why are so many doors silent when a life needs it most? There are many other details behind this incident that will make you speechless. If you find it worth listening to, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. When the police arrived, it was just before 5 a.m. The hallways of the elite at City Park apartment complex were lit up by the flashing blue and red lights of patrol cars. But inside, everything remained eerily quiet. Ashley's body lay motionless on the cold tile floor, just steps away from her own apartment. It was a heartbreaking image. The line between life and death can sometimes be so short. The door to her apartment was still ajar. There was no sign of a break-in from the outside. In the living room, the sofa was out of place. The tablecloth was on the floor. A can of hairspray was still lying around. All of it suggested a scenario. The conflict did not come from outside, but began right inside the apartment. The field technicians began their meticulous work. They took photos, marked every bloodstain that ran down the hallway, noted bloody handprints on the doorknobs of several apartments, and then returned to the starting point, Ashley's apartment. What caught their attention most was not the disturbances, but what was missing: the phone. In modern society, a person's phone is almost a living diary. It records every text message, call, photo, appointment. The disappearance of the phone not only makes the investigation more difficult, but also serves as a silent confession that the killer did not want to leave any traces. Outside in the hallway, officers knocked on each apartment door. Many residents said they heard knocking, running footsteps, but they were too afraid to open the door. Some admitted to looking through the peephole, seeing the silhouette of a wounded woman, but also chose to remain silent out of fear. These confessions made the police bitter. If only one door had been opened, perhaps everything would have been different. The police reconstructed the timeline. Around 4:20 a.m., the first noise came from Ashley's apartment. At 4:25 a.m., some residents heard knocking on the door and cries for help. At 4:30 a.m., gunshots, then silence. By the time the police got the call and arrived at the scene, Ashley was gone. The investigation expanded. The technical team collected fingerprints from the doorknob, the table, and even the displaced sofa. Small bloodstains along the hallway were numbered, each drop a part of the story left behind. Hallway and parking lot cameras were pulled. The footage was unclear, but it still showed a tall, thin man walking silently out of Ashley's apartment at the fateful moment. Meanwhile, the forensic team began analyzing. The bullet was determined to be a 9mm. The murder weapon was not found, but the trajectory indicated that the killer had fired from very close range, almost face to face. That further confirmed the theory. This was not a random break-in or robbery. It was the result of a direct confrontation between two acquaintances. From there, the important question arose. Who was in the apartment that early morning? Investigators began to reach out to Ashley's friends and relatives. They described her as a cautious person who rarely let strangers into her home and never opened the door to anyone after midnight. That narrowed the circle of suspects. Whoever was in the apartment was definitely someone Ashley knew, at least enough to let her through the door. The first name to come up was Darius Mills, a name that several friends had heard Ashley mention, sometimes in confusion, sometimes in distress. Some said Ashley had complained about Mills's excessive demands, his controlling texts, even his showing up at odd hours. When the police ran a background check, they discovered that Mills was no stranger. He had a criminal record, had been in minor trouble, and, most notably, was banned from owning a gun. This information added to the suspicious picture. If the killer used a 9mm, and Mills was not allowed to own a weapon, then his presence in Ashley's apartment was no longer just a question, but a crucial link. Investigators continued to track down the contact records. Although Ashley's phone was missing, the carrier provided records of calls and texts from around the time of the murder, and Mills's number appeared repeatedly in those records, especially late at night. The picture began to emerge. Ashley was with Mills that night. They had an argument. The missing phone was the cause, and the evidence was erased. And the gunshot, the one that ended Ashley's life, may have been an act of anger and prejudice, as Mills learned more about her identity. But when investigators reached Mills, he was no longer out in the world. Ironically, Mills was in the Fulton County Jail for another incident. This fact was both a relief to the police and a strange one. If the prime suspect was in jail, how could he be involved? But the arrest records show that Mills was arrested only after the Ashley murder, and the timing matches perfectly. That means that on that fateful night, he was completely free. The clues are clear, but there is still an important piece missing: Ashley's phone. It has completely disappeared, leaving no trace, as if swallowed into space. And that is the most vivid evidence that the killer not only wanted to kill, but also erased the victim's last words. But why? Just to hide a message? Or is there something darker, hidden behind that cold, bright screen? There are many other details of this investigation that will leave you speechless. If you think this is a story that needs to be told, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. Nearly 2 months after Ashley Burton's death, the case file was growing thicker by the day. Little pieces of bloodstain, a blurry photo, a half-hearted confession were pieced together like a giant jigsaw puzzle. And as the picture began to emerge, they all pointed to one name. Mills was not initially the prime suspect. He had been in and out of Ashley's apartment, but there was no direct evidence of guilt. But investigators did not overlook the fact that Ashley was very careful about who entered his home. If anyone was sitting in the apartment in the early hours of the morning, it was definitely not a stranger. The call logs from the carrier revealed important clues. On the night of the 10th of April and the early morning of the 11th of April, Mills's number appeared repeatedly in Ashley's contact log. They texted and called back and forth, and the signal matched the location of Ashley's apartment building. At the same time, the hallway camera footage showed a tall, thin man in a dark shirt emerging from Ashley's apartment shortly after the gunshots. The image was not sharp, but when compared to Mills's description of his appearance, the coincidence was undeniable. Witnesses in the building also gradually opened up. At first, they were hesitant because of fear. But when they learned that the police had targeted a specific suspect, some began to give more details. They recalled the mournful knocking on the door, the sound of hurried footsteps, and the shadow of a man following Ashley in the hallway. Although no one dared to confirm that they had seen Mills pull the trigger, the account was enough to paint a picture of the fateful morning. Ashley running away, and the stalker determined not to let her escape. What made the police even more convinced was the mysterious disappearance of the phone. One witness said that after Ashley collapsed, the shadow of a man bent down to pick something up from the floor. Combined with the fact that the phone was not found, the hypothesis was that the killer not only wanted to kill, but also intentionally erased traces, depriving the victim of the last chance to call for help. While the investigators were focusing all their attention on Mills, an irony occurred. He was detained in the Fulton County Jail for an unrelated incident that took place shortly after Ashley's death. This, instead of eliminating him, made it easier for the police. They did not have to launch a tense manhunt, but could directly send a warrant to the detention facility. On the 6th of June, 2023, an official arrest warrant was issued. Mills was indicted on charges of murder, armed robbery, possession of a firearm while having a previous conviction, and use of a weapon during the commission of a crime. From here, the police's work was temporarily closed, leaving room for the prosecutor to build a case. And they knew that to convict someone like Mills, fragmentary evidence wasn't enough. They needed a seamless, unbroken picture. The case was laid out in sections. First came the physical evidence, the 9mm bullet that matched the gun Mills was suspected of using in another crime, the bloodstains along the hallway that matched the route Ashley ran. Then came the digital evidence, phone records that put Mills in the building at the same time the crime happened. Then came the eyewitness evidence. Residents heard screams for help. But more than the cold evidence, the prosecutors wanted the jury to know Ashley, a cautious, principled woman who loved her family and who had never invited strangers into her home in the middle of the night. That negated any possibility that the killer was random. They also delved into Mills's psychology. His record showed he had a criminal history, a history of violence, and most notably, a deep-seated prejudice against transgender people. Previous text messages were extracted, in which Mills was jealous, controlling, and repeatedly suspicious of Ashley. These details, taken together, turned into a portrait of a man who refused to accept the truth about his victim. The motive, therefore, was no longer just a petty dispute. It was a matter of possessiveness, control, and prejudice. The phone was just the spark. The real fire had been burning inside Mills for a long time. Anger at having to face a woman who was true to herself, despite the harsh gaze of society. However, there was a big question that troubled the prosecutor: how to prove this was a hate crime. The law required clear evidence that Mills had acted only because Ashley was a transgender woman. But beyond the phone revealing her true identity, beyond the angry look in Mills's eyes as she read the messages, there was nothing strong enough to warrant a legal record. The LGBTQ+ community in Atlanta was outraged. For them, there was no need for a legal record. They knew that Ashley was killed, not just because of a personal conflict, but because she dared to live her truth. They took to the streets, holding up Ashley's mugshot, calling for justice, demanding that the case be treated as a hate crime. In the small conference room of the prosecutor's office, people discussed for hours. Should they emphasize the hate factor, even though the evidence was not strong enough, or focus on the existing series of crimes, which were enough to put Mills in prison for life? In the end, they chose the sure path: to build a continuous picture, from the gunshot in the apartment to the desperate knock on the door, and the man's figure disappearing with the phone. And the question remains, for the jury, as well as for the community: does justice stop at convicting a person, or must it go further? Looking straight into the silence of the neighbors, at the doors that did not open, at the prejudice that contributed to Ashley's death? There are many details in the upcoming trial that will make you rethink the meaning of the two words, justice. If you find this story worth continuing, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. On the day of Darius Mills's trial, the Fulton County Courthouse was packed. The long hallway outside the courtroom echoed with the rapid footsteps of reporters and the constant clicking of cameras. In the first row, Ashley's family sat silently, clutching her framed photograph. Her brother Patrick bowed his head, his hands clenched and trembling, while her mother choked with tears, her eyes red. When Mills entered, wearing an orange prison uniform, his hands cuffed, the air in the room froze. He didn't bow his head, didn't dodge, but looked straight ahead, his eyes cold and incomprehensible. It wasn't the face of someone who felt remorse. It was the face of someone who knew it was all over, but didn't care. The prosecutor began with a firm voice. This was not an accident. This was a premeditated murder. The victim was shot in his own apartment, then chased down the hallway, desperately calling for help. But no one answered the door. And the person who caused this tragedy was the defendant, Darius Mills. Each piece of evidence was presented. Ballistics showed the bullet came from a 9mm gun, a weapon Mills was banned from owning. Cameras captured him leaving the apartment shortly after Ashley collapsed. Witnesses described a frantic knock on the door, the shadow of a man following the victim. And finally, phone records, calls, texts, GPS signals confirmed that Mills was there at the fateful moment. The defense tried to turn the tables. They said circumstantial evidence, blurry photos, witnesses did not see Mills pull the trigger. They mentioned the principle, innocent until proven guilty, but against a coherent chain of events, those arguments faltered. What silenced the courtroom was when the prosecutors replayed Ashley's final minutes. They played the recording of the witness testimony. The frantic knocking on the door, the cries of, "Help me," echoing in the darkness. The jury bowed their heads, some wiping away tears. Ashley's family wept as they listened. Patrick held his cousin Ivory's hand, his voice choking. She knocked. Just needed a door to open. Finally, after days of deliberation, the jury retreated to the back of the room. The wait seemed like an eternity. Then they returned, and the verdict was read aloud. Guilty. Darius Mills was sentenced to life without parole for murder. 20 years for armed robbery. 10 years for 2 weapons charges. All on top of each other. He would never get out of jail again. The courtroom exploded with emotion. Ashley's family wept. Some friends hugged each other, both heartbroken and relieved. At least Ashley had been called by her name, but at the same time, everyone knew that the verdict would not bring her back. For Atlanta's LGBTQ+ community, the trial was more than a verdict. It was a stark reminder of a harsh reality. Trans women of color face far greater danger. They must contend not only with social stigma, but also with relationships that are fraught with control, violence, and silence. On social media, friends retweeted videos of Ashley's posts, images of her doing a client's hair, her gentle smile in the mirror, her familiar line, "What version of yourself do you want to be today?" The clips now became a legacy, both beautiful and haunting. Ashley's family chose to forgive. They said in tears, "We don't want to carry hatred in our hearts. Forgiveness doesn't erase the pain, but it saves us from being imprisoned with the person who killed our daughter. But that forgiveness doesn't erase the lingering question, the question that haunts the whole society. Why didn't the doors open? Why did so many eyes see, so many ears hear, but no one had the courage to act?" Perhaps Ashley's tragedy lies not only in the bullet that Mills fired, but also in the collective silence. At the moment of the boundary between life and death, the only thing she needed was a hand to pull her inside. But that hand didn't come. The story ends in a cold hallway, where knocks on the door have faded into the past. But its echo still echoes. In the moment someone calls for help, do we dare to open the door? If you want to know more stories where justice, truth, and pain intersect, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.